Hayoim Yom Rishon by Shabbos. Today is Sunday. It's Zayin Adar. Teresh Zachis as a Yom Ledes Moshe Rabbeinu. Now there's a couple of problems with today being the Yom Ledes Moshe Rabbeinu. The first is, I heard this from a friend of mine, that when you have two Adars, the yahrzeit is commemorated in the first Adar, not the second Adar. Now, Yom Ledes, you have to commemorate in the second Adar, unless you know that Moshe Rabbeinu was born in an Ibiyar. And the Rebbe brings, there's a lot of days in the Gemara, it's a controversy. The Rebbe brings that Moshe Rabbeinu was born in Adar Rishon. The Rebbe seems to conclude that Moshe Rabbeinu was born in Adar Rishon. So in terms of the yahrzeit, you have to commemorate it last month. And in terms of the birthday, if Moshe Rabbeinu was born in Ibiyar, as the Rebbe contends, and he was born in Adar Rishon, but don't worry, we'll celebrate it anyway. I got a text early this morning, like 8 o'clock in the morning, which is like for me 6 o'clock in the morning. Should we say Tachnan today? And the answer is yes. The story is, the Rebbe spoke about this in the early years, and I've repeated this sikha many times, that in the Yinfana yahrzeit, Chabad takes what amounts to a central position. There are kehillas who fast on the yahrzeit. Tainus Yom Shemeis Be'ava Ve'imei. They fast on the yahrzeit. The logic for fasting on the yahrzeit is because a fast in Yiddishkeit is never a day of suffrage. It's not about suffering, but it's about tshuva. Like the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tainus, every fast day is a yom, it's a Yisratzin, it's an infant tshuva. And of course, one of the most basic ideas of tshuva that the Rebbe always talks about is the infant v'hachayit and the living. And the living shall take to heart. As the Rambam discusses it in Hilchos Avelis also, that when someone dies, it's a message to everybody who knows that person. You know, a person died, then he was 100, then he was 88, 110. When an event occurs, which is in relationship with us, and from our perspective, a negative event, it's, as they call it, it's a wake-up call. We believe in Hashgacha Pratis, and if you believe in Hashgacha Pratis, the fact that you are aware of this event makes you connected to it, and therefore, there has to be an Indian, what is the Lashon? Meis echad min chabura. If one person from a group passes away, so then the whole chabura kula, the whole group has to do an even from tshuva. So therefore, there's a tradition that on the yahrzeit you fast, because fasting thing in a tshuva. By Hasidim, that means non-Chabad Hasidim is the opposite extreme. They make a yom tov out of a yahrzeit of a tzaddik, based on the idea that the yahrzeit of a tzaddik is not called the p'tid, it's called the histalkus. And the infinite histalkus is that the neshama goes to a higher madrege, and according to what it says in Tanya, it doesn't depart. To the contrary, it continues to have a relationship with this world, and a certain prat, it has more of a relationship with this world after the histalkus than it did while it was in a guf, because when it was in a guf, it was fixed in a certain time and in a certain place, and now those limitations go away. So by Pele Shachsidim, they make a yom tif. Every histalkus of a tzaddik is a yom tif. It's a yahrzeit. They don't say Tachnan. If you're really religious about it, you can never say Tachnan in your entire life, because there's a yahrzeit of some tzaddik every day of the year, and you have the right books. They give you lists, and some shuls they hang, especially Minchas of Mishkatach. So the Rebbe says we don't take that position either, even though that's true. The Histalkus is a Hilula, it's a Yom Tif, it's a very great Simcha, like the Desire describes the B'negei Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. Rab Shimon Bar Yochai wanted that they should be rejoicing on the day of his Histalkus, and the Middle Rebbe also wanted Chassidim should make a Simcha of the infant Histalkus, because by the Histalkus of a Tzaddik is a very spiritually uplifted event for the Tzaddik, personally. And in an indirect way to all those around him. But we don't do that. So the Rebbe said that I once asked the Rebbe the Shver, I asked the Frierdiker Rebbe why we say Tachnan on the yahrzeit. It seems reasonable that you should do what the Polish should do. You should make it into a Hilula. It's a positive event and so forth. And the Frierdiker Rebbe's answer to the Rebbe was, when then is da best of the Tag Log in the Tachnan. Which means in English, when is there a better day to say Tachnan on the yahrzeit? Which means to say that the Rebbe is confirming in part the idea that a yahrzeit is a day of Hisaydus and a day of tshuva, because of the principle of achayit and alibi. So the Rebbe's conclusion is that we're sort of in the center. We don't take such an extreme to fast. On the other hand, we don't just focus on the simcha, you focus on the reality. In other words, there's two sides to a yahrzeit. There's the ptira and there's the histalkus. There's what is missing from the physical world, and there is the spiritual ascent. The spiritual ascent is a favorable thing. What's missing from the physical world, whether we like it or not, whether we accept it or not, is not a favorable thing. So how do you have both together? You don't fast, but you say tachnu. Now the Rebbe spoke when again to Moshe Rabbeinu in particular, that Moshe Rabbeinu has a shaykhs with every yid. This is one. The Rebbe said, Zayin Adar Tafshin Nun Beis to Tzapeh. That Moshe Rabbeinu is the first Rebbe, right? Moshe Rabbeinu is the first Neshama Klalis, the first general soul is Moshe Rabbeinu. Sheish Meis Elef Ragli Ha'omer Sha'anechi B'kirbei. Moshe Rabbeinu, the way it says in the Maimonides, because he was the head of 600,000 feet, he himself was elevated to the Madrega of Anoichi. In other words, he was elevated to a level which was really higher than Moshe Rabbeinu himself, but it was what Moshe Rabbeinu had because he was Rabban Shal Yisrael, the Rebbe of Yidden. Like Rashi says in Chumash, that when the Yidden made the Egel, Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Leich reid kishich esamcha, go down. Your nation did a hashchosa, destruction, desecration. Says Rashi, Klum nasati l'chagedula Allah b'shvil elu. The only reason I gave you greatness is because of them, and because I am not favorably disposed towards them, you're going to be demoted, lowered. But then later it says, when the Eibishter forgave Yidden, Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Kum alei, rise up, take Yidden into Eretz Yisrael. One of the more painful episodes in Chumash Rashi, which people don't pay attention to. When I think about it, it makes me very nervous. Moshe Rabbeinu was the Rebbe of Yidden for 40 years. Of those 40 years, Rashi says that for 38 of them, Moshe was Menuda Lamok. Of those 40 years, 38 of those 40 years, the Eibishter was not in the same relationship with Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, the great prophetic heights that we read about in the Chumash that Moshe Rabbeinu achieved, and the Mefarshim will explain that he was higher than any Navi, and he didn't need a Malach. I discussed it with you the other day in class. Was only true at the beginning. When the Yidden sinned, the Eibishter distanced himself from Moshe Rabbeinu, and that distance continued till the last of the Jews who were Yotzei Mitzrayim, who had to die in the midbar, passed away, and then it says, Vahi devarad Hashem elai le'meid. In other words, of the 40 years of Moshe Rabbeinu's Rebbeship, only 2 of them was Moshe Rabbeinu in the full intimacy with Hashem because of Yidden. And that's what's so distinctive, that's what is so special about Moshe Rabbeinu individually, and what we are learning about in the Sichos and in Chassidus, and of course it comes from Kabbalah, the idea of, the Rebbe brings that the word Rebbe is a Rabban Shal Yisrael. But the Rebbe also brings the word Nasi from the Sefer Kilas Yankiv, Nitzutze Shal Yankiv Avinu, a spark of Yankiv Avinu. Yankiv Avinu was one man, and he encompassed the whole Jewish nation, biologically, physically. Nitzutze Shal Yankiv Avinu means one man who encompasses the whole Jewish nation, mystically and spiritually, like it says in Chumash Rashi, Pshutei Shal Mikra. Vayishlach Yisrael, Vayishmach Moshe, says Rashi, this teaches us, Melamed Shal Nasi Hu HaKol. The Nasi is the whole people. The whole generation is like the Nasi, and the Nasi is like the whole generation. But what makes a Nasi, what makes a Rebbe, what makes Moshe Rabbeinu, as great as Moshe Rabbeinu was, as an individual, was the fact that he's the head of the nation. And when Chas v'Shalom, there's a deficiency in the nation, it affected a deficiency in Moshe Rabbeinu. But that's how the Eibishter created his world. The Eibishter created his world that there should be Vayaminu b'Hashem of Moshe Avdei. You have this in Chumash. The Eibishter wants that there should be, what the Rebbe calls in the Sichos, Einochi Eimid ben Hashem Alokechem b'Beinechem lahagim lachem es Bar Hashem. A Nasi b'Yisrael, a Rebbe, a Nasi b'Yisrael. And it says in the Mechilta, the Rebbe brings always from the Mechilta, Vayaminu b'Hashem of Moshe Avdei kol misha maimin b'Moshe maimin b'Hashem. If you believe in Moshe Rabbeinu, that's a simon, you believe in the Eibishter. And of course, the opposite, it doesn't say, but the opposite is understood. So the Eibishter made that there should be a Rebbe, a Moshe Rabbeinu. But the inyan of a Moshe Rabbeinu is his identity, in other words, his special maila is not himself personally, but the fact that he is Nesi Yisrael, the fact that he is the head, the Rosh B'nai Yisrael, the head of Klal Yisrael. That's what makes A Rebbe. I've told this story to you before, that Kach Shamaytim. This is a nice story. I think it's helping. The Rebbe organized a minyan of Chassidim to go into the Frierdiker Rebbe and to request a bracha from the Frierdiker Rebbe that there should be amongst Lubavitcher Chassidim, rich people, Gvirim, Ashirim. So the Rebbe shouldn't need to come on to Yidden who are non-Lubavitchers for the support and for the work and so forth. But it never materialized. Before this minyan had a chance to go into the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away. So this minyan had a very, very simple idea. They walked into the Rebbe, whose idea it was in the first place, and they proposed to the Rebbe that the Rebbe should give a bracha, that the Lubavitch should have its own Gvirim, because the Rebbeim shouldn't need to come on to anybody else. And the Rebbe's response was, "It's der Zeich mit andere Spakulen," which means I'm looking through another set of spectacles. I see it differently. It's a different issue. It's not so simple. I've told this story to you before also, that the Rebbe visited Paris in 1947 to get his mother. And while he was there, a lot of Lubavitcher Chassidim came to him, and they told him that they want to come to the United States. And the Rebbe was very in favor of it. The Rebbe wanted very much the Lubavitcher to come to America. But they're having a hard time getting a bracha from Frierdiker Rebbe. So the Rebbe said, "You're making a mistake. Don't ask the Frierdiker Rebbe. Tell him you're coming to America and ask him for a bracha." So they did it. And they got brachas from the Frierdiker Rebbe to come to America. When the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away, people again wrote to the Rebbe and said to the Rebbe, "We're coming to America and we want a bracha." And the Rebbe's answer to them was, "Aren't you supposed to ask first?" This is your very idea. And of course the point was, when the Rebbe told them to come to America, it was B'nesiach and Frierdiker Rebbe. Whatever the cheshbonos are in Das Tachten, but this is the word. In other words, the Rebbe is obviously a great person. But the true inyan of a Rebbe that we always talk about in Chassidus is a koyach that he has from the people. The Rebbe said this to many people, many occasions. A koyach I have come from Chassidim. This just a thought. Think about this for a second. Why when you go to a Rebbe, you ask him for a bracha, you ask him for a tefillah, it's effective. Obviously, a Rebbe is a tzaddik. A Rebbe has special koyches, like the Rebbe explained on many occasions, and so forth and so on. But just think of it in very simple terms. Imagine you can get the entire Jewish nation to pray for you. Every Jew on the planet should daven for you. That's pretty powerful. Now, if all the Yidden in the world got together and davened for one thing at one moment, it's reasonable to presume that the Eibishter would have a very hard time telling us no. That's what happens when you ask a Rebbe to daven on your behalf, because he's an inyan kloli. He's like a one person. The Rebbe brings a lashon Yochid Sharabim Tzrichim Lo Yet David HaMelech Ki Berabim Hoyim Madi. He's one person, but he's a person that he's a ish klal. His identity is the community. So when he davens, Yidden are davening. In other words, there's a very simple explanation, a very balabatish explanation for why when you ask a Rebbe bracha, it's effective, because it's essentially like asking every Jew in the world to daven on your behalf. Moshe Rabbeinu was the first Rebbe. And Kedua, Apiskom, and I've shared this with you on previous occasions, the Frierdiker Rebbe said in a Sikha that Rabbi Isaac Homler said that Adam Arishan is nicht gewesen kein Rebbe. Adam Arishan was not a Rebbe. Now saying Adam Arishan is not a Rebbe is very not simple. Why? Because Adam Arishan is the epitome of a Neshama Klalis. There is no more general soul than Adam Arishan. Adam Arishan includes all souls, every single soul till Mashiach. After Mashiach comes, there's going to be Neshamas Chadashis, new Neshamas, which are not included in Adam Arishan. And L'cha'ira, when you speak about the Alter Rebbe being a new Neshama, it's also not included in Adam Arishan. But the Rubei Kekule, when you speak about Neshamas Yisrael, we're all included in Adam Arishan. How do you not say Adam Arishan was a Rebbe? Now, of course, what was Isaac Homler's Raya? What was Isaac Homler's Raya that Adam Arishan was not a Rebbe? Because if he had been a Rebbe, he could not have done an Aveda.
What?
He could not have done an Aveda. Not because of his own koiches, but the koiches of the cloud. Van Amaisim in Tzemach Tzedek in the middle of Rebbe. This is a story. That the middle of Rebbe wanted very much that the Tzemach Tzedek should live in Lubavitch, where he was Rebbe. The Tzemach Tzedek wanted very much that he should not live in Lubavitch. for a simple reason. He wanted to sit and learn and daven, and he wanted to be his own person. And he knew if he's going to be in Lubavitch, he's going to be swept away by the tumult of Chassidus and the Rebbe the Shved. The Mittler Rebbe was his father-in-law. And the Mittler Rebbe was by mind gebet. When the Mittler Rebbe relocated to Lubavitch, Tzemach Tzedek was not in Lubavitch. I think he was in Kremenchuk. He went into business. He had a whole business. He was busy. He was looking for a job as a Rav. And the Mittler Rebbe begged him, in effect, to come live in Lubavitch. And he told him, I know why you don't want to live in Lubavitch. It's because you want to sit and learn and daven, and you're afraid that I'm going to take you over. He says, I promise you I won't bother you. Come sit in Lubavitch, I will not disturb you at all. Just one thing I'm going to ask. And that is that the Shailas and Nigla, Shas and Halacha, you should answer. The Alter Rebbe used to answer Shailas. And you know, you have from the Rebbe Marash also Tshuvas. You have from the Rebbe Rashab Tshuvas. In Nigla, Halacha Zachen. The Mittler Rebbe, who was a Gana Goyin, and was a very big Goyin in Nigla, was so obsessed with Chassidus that the Nigla he didn't want to get involved with. He told the Tzemach Tzedek, you should answer the Shalos and Tshuvas in Nigla. And the Tzemach Tzedek acquiesced. He came to Lubavitch, and he lived. And of course, the Mittler Rebbe's leaving him alone didn't last for very long. He promised him to leave him alone, but then, of course, things changed. The circumstance changed. Mittler Rebbe was ill. When the Mittler Rebbe was ill, the Tzemach Tzedek got involved in the Mittler Rebbe's Nesias. The Friedrich writes in a Siche, two kings sharing one crown. Mamish like the Rebbe and the Friedrich Rebbe. You know, the Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek had the same name. They had the same relationship, a father-in-law and a son-in-law, not a father and a son. And just like the Rebbe, the Yatz was ill. When the Rebbe stood Mamish like Moshe Yodem Metech Yodei, the same thing with the Tzemach Tzedek and the Mittler Rebbe. But so long as the Mittler Rebbe was healthy, he left him alone, more or less. And the Seder was, Tzemach Tzedek wrote the Tshuvas. When people asked Shailas, and of course they were not simple Shailas, they were very deep and serious and responsible Shailas, Tzemach Tzedek used to prepare a Tshuva. I think for a Meshach Zman he learned with the Nechemia de Brovna. And they prepared the Tshuvas together. And then they would show it to the Mittler Rebbe. After they showed it to the Mittler Rebbe, they would send it. So, one time, and the Mittler Rebbe looked at the Tshuvas, never made a comment. They showed him the tshuva, he acknowledged it and sent it back. And it looked like he was being very, formal about it. If he wasn't really reading the tshuva, he was simply, accepting it. So the Tzemach Tzedek once had a situation where there was an emergency, and the tshuva could not wait. And he was so accustomed to the fact that the Mittler Rebbe never made any comments on his tshuvas that he sent it. And when the opportunity arose several days later, he came into his father-in-law, the Mittler Rebbe, who was also his uncle, and he showed him the tshuva. Mittler Rebbe took a glance at the tshuva, and he told him, "Dos vergessen a teisvis. You forgot a teisvis." And it was true. And the Tzemach Tzedek was devastated. He was devastated. He had worked in this tshuva for 3 days. Mittler Rebbe glanced at it. And in all the years that he'd been writing tshuvas, Mittler Rebbe never made a comment. On that one occasion, when he sent the tshuva without his approval, he forgot a teisvis. He was very upset. The Mittler Rebbe tells him, "Sorg sich nicht, bist noch nicht kein Rebbe." Don't feel bad, you're not a Rebbe yet. That's the word. So what's the pshat? The pshat is that the koyach that a Rebbe has, as great as the Rebbe is not his own koyach, the koyach the Rebbe has is the koyach that he has from the tzibur, from the kol, from the Adar, from the am. And this makes a Rebbe, in fact, infallible. Not because of himself, but because of the koyach he has from the tzibur. So Rabbi Isaac Homler said, Adam Rishon is the epitome of a Neshama Klalis. There never was a more encompassing soul than the soul of Adam Rishon. But Adam Rishon didn't have raglayim. He didn't have feet. He didn't have amcha. He didn't have simple people. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Sheis meis elef ragli ha'ama shanechi b'kirbei. The Jewish nation that I am leading are like 600,000 feet compared to Moshe Rabbeinu, who was like a roish to raglayim, a head to feet. But Moshe Rabbeinu immediately adds, that because I am the roish of these raglayim, that's why I have this madrega of anoichi. So Isaac Homler says, as great as Adam Rishon was, it was a mile of Adam Prati. As great as he was an individual, because there were no people to rebbe over, to shepherd over, which is a very interesting idea. You learn B'rei Vam Hades Melech. There's Mamari Chassidus on this. B'rei Vam Hades Melech is more than a technicality. A king needs subjects, because the subjects honor the king. But it's much deeper than that. The subjects don't only honor the king, they create the king. And this is true also. And Dafka Reiv Am, many simple people. And you don't say kol, you say Reiv. Reiv is usually a word that's associated with opposite of Achdus. It's saying, Roi v'am hadas melech. The melech becomes a melech, and the greatness of the melech is determined by the Roi v'am, by the size of the population. Because in terms of spiritual koyches, every Jew gives a certain koyach. And the more Yidden you have, the greater the koyach. And the greater the koyach of Yidden, the greater koyach the Eibush to give the Reish B'nai Yisrael, the Nasi Adar, the head of the generation. So the Rebbe explained in this Siche, which he just chazed a moment before, that Moshe Rabbeinu is the first Rebbe. In other words, the first time you had a man whose neshama was heightened because of his relationship to other neshamas Yisrael. And then we say, there's a Zohar that says, Hispashtus de Moshe b'chol dara v'dara. That means there's an expansion of the neshama of Moshe in every generation. Just as Moshe Rabbeinu in his generation was the Nasi Adar, in every generation is a Rebbe and Nasi, a Neshama Klalis that encompasses all the Jews of his generation. Or the Lashon HaMedrash, which the Rebbe often cites. But the Cheder of the Medrash is stronger than the Zohar. But for some reason the Rebbe more frequently quoted the Zohar than the Medrash. The Medrash says, Ein Doyesh, Ein Boy Moshe. There is no generation that there isn't somebody like Moshe Rabbeinu, which is an interesting statement. Ein, Hispashtus de Moshe b'chol dara v'dara, you could say a trace, a ray, a ha'ara. Ein Doyesh, Ein Boy Moshe means there is no generation that there isn't somebody like Moshe Rabbeinu. And of course the idea is that the Eibush to design the Jewish nation to be echad, to be one. We're made up of many individuals. And each individual Jew himself is a whole world. In other words, each individual Jew himself is made up of a whole bunch of different midas and tchunes and contradictions. And within that individual, there are a maimed matzav of shalom and a maimed matzav of echad and so forth and so on. And then you have a greater achdus of the collective Jew. All of us together create an achdus. And the nature of the unity of the Jewish nation, like I said in Tanya chapter 2, the nature of the unity of the Jewish nation is we're all one, but we're not all the same. I shouldn't say the word equal because I get into trouble, but we're like a body. You know, a body that's made up of only of heads, api halacha, cannot live. A head is more important than feet, but you're supposed to have one head and 2 feet. 2 feet. 2 feet. Hopefully have more than 2 feet, of many, many, many feet. So the same is true of the Neshama Yisrael. In each generation there's a diversity of Jews, there's many Jews, and many different types of Jews. Some of the eyes, and some of the mind, and some of the mouth, and some of the nose, the ears. And then you have the arms and the legs and the hair and the nails and so forth and so on, like it says in Tanya. But this complex body makes up an achdus, and at its center is the head. And just like physically and biologically, the head is not just one of the organs of the body. It is the central organ of the body. That's where the neshama is. That's where the neshama enters into the person. Like it says Tanya chapter 51, the brain distributes life to the whole person. The brain keeps the whole person unified, and on and on and on and on and on. The same is true with Rebbe Nasi Tzaddik. He's the Neshama Klalis of the generation, and the connection that he didn't have with the Eibush is through that Tzaddik. Like the Rebbe brings the Raya in Pashas Ba'aleischa. The Rebbe spoke about this often in Tafshin Yud and Tafshin Yud Aleph, that Moshe Rabbeinu complains to the Eibush about 2 things, and they seem entirely separate. But the way the story unfolds in the Torah leaves one, if you will, confused. What are the 2 issues? One issue is that the Jewish nation wants basar. They want flesh. They want meat. They want something that they can not just taste, but actually chew and digest. Slav, they didn't just want the man that was called by them lechem akleikel. And the second issue was, Moshe Rabbeinu says, if you will, I can't handle it anymore. I need help. And the Eibush tells them to make shivim zakein, shivim 70 elders. These are 2 separate issues. I mean, they come together because when you read a story for face value, it seems like Moshe had enough. Viva the Shir. This is, Moshe had enough. One complaint, the second complaint, the third complaint, the fourth complaint. When they complain about Slav, Moshe says, I need help. And the Eibush gives them shivim zakein. Now, I am sorry for doing this to you, but I'm not sorry for doing it to you, because if I was sorry, I wouldn't do it. I want to interrupt. I just read last night in Yudel Chitrik Sefer that the Alter Rebbe, Chassidim overheard the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe in a discussion. And the Alter Rebbe, so they understood. The Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe are talking this, what they hear. So they listened. They shouldn't have, but they did. We're in a conversation. The Rebbe was saying, I can't do this. I can't handle it. I can't handle the Chassidim. It's too much for me. So, the Mittel Rebbe says, why are you different than your Rebbe? The Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid, they also had communities. They also had an Adar. They managed. How come they managed? You're not managing. So the Rebbe says, how could you compare me to my Rebbes? They had Shishim Giboidim. They had 60 tzaddikim, 60 warriors who stood by their side to help them carry the load. So the Mittel Rebbe says to the Alter Rebbe, you also have Shishim Giboidim. And he started to list Chassidim. And some of the Chassidim who he was listing were standing behind that wall listening to the conversation. And whenever the Mittel Rebbe would say a name of a Chassid, and the Alter Rebbe would acknowledge, I don't know what word to use, but it sounds like the other Chassidim gave him a pinch. Like, don't get carried away. That's not nice. Okay, Adkan Maimer Amuz. So the Alter Rebbe in the Kutei Torah asks, when you read this story, you didn't ask Hashem for meat. Moshe complains for the meat and asks, he says, I can't handle it anymore. And the Eibishter answers him in reverse order. First Hashem tells him, take 70 elders. A whole story, how are you going to take 70 elders? Like answer mice, it's not, the details are important. They should select 6 from each tribe. 6 times 12 is 72, and they were going to make a goydel. 70 would come out. 2 would be Vehema Baksuvim. And of course, Eldad and Medad, who according to the Targum were actually Moshe Rabbeinu's half-brothers, who were the 2 outstanding members, ended up becoming prophets right in the middle of the camp. And what did everybody hear them say? Moshe Meis V'Yeshua Machnisam La'aretz. The last thing they wanted to hear. But they became prophets. And after they became prophets, Hashem says, I will give the Jewish nation meat. So the Alter Rebbe says, you look at the story, you didn't complain about meat. Moshe complains about meat, and he says, I can't handle it. And the Eibishter answers him in Lashon Ha'Torah Mishnah al Acher Rishon v'al Rishon Nachem. The second request is answered first, and the first request is answered second. And if you remember the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, that's not the Shiva Dvarim B'Chochma. So the Rebbe says, I'll give all the Keteretz. These 2 requests are really one. Moshe Rabbeinu is the Rabban Shal Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu was the Rebbe, the Nasi Hadar. He's their head. And as their head, the spiritual, mystically, from the perspective of the Neshama Yisrael, he is the center of the Achdus of Yid. Like I said to you before, Jewish unity is unified but not simple. It's complex. Every Jew serves a distinctive role. We're not all the same. We're all distinctive. And at the center, at the head, is the Rosh B'nai Yisrael, the Rebbe, Nasib Yisrael. And Yidden come to Moshe Rabbeinu and they say, we want to have basar. So Moshe comes to the Eibishter and he says, Me'ayin li basar. And the Rebbe explains it as follows. Moshe says to the Eibishter, you made me the head of this generation. If you made me the head of this generation, the Eibishter's design for this generation is on a madrega of having Moshe as their Rebbe, as their head. It says, Moshe Rabbeinu me'ayin. I am a madrega of ayin, as opposed to a madrega of yesh. Ayin means keser, higher than Atzilus. Yesh in this context would be Atzilus. So yesh, I'm not going to go into that. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, me'ayin li basar. You made me their Rebbe. I'm in a madrega of ayin. Mon I can provide. Be'eireh shal Miriam I can provide. Anani HaKoved I can provide. This was through Miriam, this is through Adar, but it's also Moshe Rabbeinu. Ayin li basar. I cannot stoop this low. If I am their head and they are my body, there's a missing link. I cannot give them basar. So the Eibishter says, take 70 elders. And then it says, V'atzalti min haruach asher alecha v'atzalti aleim. I will emanate from the fire, from the light, from the spirit which is upon you, and I will emanate it upon you. Where do you have the word Atzilus in the Chumash? In Chumash. V'atzalti, I will emanate, I will shine. Min haruach asher alecha v'atzalti aleim, and they will be your assistants. They'll help you with the prophecy. So the Rebbe says, immediately what you see here is Hashem decided to make 70 Nevi'im. But he didn't simply give 70 people prophecy. He gave 70 people prophecy by giving them from the Ruach of Moshe Rabbeinu. So immediately you see, the first point, that any Ruchni is the Hashpah, any Ruchni is the Shefa. which flows to the nation, passes through the Rebbe, the Nasi Adar, Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, they will have nevuah because Vataltem and the Ruach Asher Alecha, Vatalti Alei. But then there's a second issue. The Nevi'im, the Shivim Zkenim, were not on the Madrega of Moshe Rabbeinu. They were one level lower. And through the 70 elders, Moshe Rabbeinu gave Yidden Basar. They wanted meat. Moshe says, Me'ayin, I can't give them meat. Moshe says, don't worry. We'll make 70 elders. They're in a lower Madrega than you. The Ashpah has to come through Moshe Rabbeinu, but it'll come through Moshe Rabbeinu, through the Shivim Zkenim, and Yidden will have flesh, Basar, meat. And that's why this story is so orderly. It makes perfect sense when you understand the pneumius of the story. Moshe is complaining about Yidden's wanting meat. Not, they're a bunch of kvetches. It's, if this is who the Jewish people are, why did you make me their Rebbe? I have no shaykhs with them. And the Eibishter says, as for Shiv Mishra. So the Rebbe learns from this, that you see from here, first of all, in a simple idea, that, a very chassidish idea, that every ashpah to a generation, the ruchnistic ashpah and the gashmistic ashpah, comes through the Rebbe the Nasi Adar, through Moshe Rabbeinu. Right? But at the same time, in that very sequence of psukim, it says, which means to say that the koyach that Moshe Rabbeinu has in order to be the Mutza Machaber comes from Yidden. Moshe Rabbeinu Moshe Rabbeinu is Moshe Rabbeinu because he's Rabbi Shal Yisrael. Says the Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu is the first. And after Moshe Rabbeinu, in every generation, is a similar idea. That there's a head, a Rosh B'nai Yisrael, who is the source of the Neshamas Yisrael and the Ashpah, the Eibishter gives Yidden and so forth and so on. And therefore the Rebbe says Moshe Rabbeinu's birthday becomes mystically the birthday of all the Yidden of his generation. If he's their head, so their Neshamas are connected to this date. And secondly, since Moshe Rabbeinu was the source of all later Moshe Rabbeinu, Zayin becomes the birthday of all the Rebbes of all later generations. And by association, Zayin is the official birthday of the whole Jewish nation. Just a couple of steps. It's Moshe Rabbeinu's birthday. If it's Moshe Rabbeinu's birthday, spiritually speaking, the Neshamas associated with Moshe Rabbeinu have a connection to this date as well. And of course, in that Fabrengen, I don't remember the Sikha, we learned it years ago. He speaks about the name from Mazel. Ein Mazel b'Yisrael. Yesh Mazel. How can you say Mazel gave it on a birthday? We say you didn't have no Mazel. Again, Tzarichis. It's not for now at the moment. Ayin Mazel Yisrael. So Zayin becomes a very important day. It becomes a very important day, not just to Moshe Rabbeinu, but to all Yidden in all times. And this is really the so to speak, the spirit of the story of Purim. That Haman Rasha knew that Zayin the Meis Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu died Zayin. Now, how did Haman know Zayin Moshe? I'm asking a question. How did Haman know? Haman had lived 1,000 years after Moshe Rabbeinu. How did he know what? Yidden had a luach of Yartzeit in the shul, and Haman sent to spy in to see this is Moshe Rabbeinu's Yartzeit. The Hispashtus, it doesn't mean the Gashmistic of Haman. It means the Mokkah, the spiritual source of Haman. So if the spiritual source of Haman knows that Moshe Rabbeinu, Zayin the Meis Moshe, why doesn't he know that Moshe Rabbeinu was born? So the Rebbe says in the Sikha, he knew Moshe Rabbeinu was born. He didn't think it mattered. Why not? Because what's a person when they're born? A potential. A possibility. You're not born a tzaddik. You're born, you're born with the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, and you're a clean slate, and the Haka B'dei Shemaim Chutz M'Yirah Shamayim, the future is determined by you, so to speak. So who cares Moshe Rabbeinu was born? A birthday, mehechetes. No, a birthday is a goyish idea, some people argue. Of course, the Rebbe disagrees. He bases it on a Yerushalmi and so forth. So Moshe Rabbeinu was born, big deal. So Rashi says in the Gemara Masechta Megillah, right? So the Gemara says, "Lo yada shebeisa yayim neilad Moshe." Haman doesn't know this day that Moshe Rabbeinu was born. It's not that he didn't know Moshe Rabbeinu was born. He didn't think that the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu means anything. Says Rashi, "Kedai yayim haleida lachapal al yayim hamis." The birthday of Moshe Rabbeinu being Zayin Adar is enough to correct whatever deficiencies are associated with the fact that on this day Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. Why? And the Rebbe answers because Moshe Rabbeinu was different. Moshe Rabbeinu is different because he's destined to be a Rebbe. Moshe Rabbeinu is different because he's a Neshama Klalis, a general soul. A general soul has a different purpose and a different journey. And you see it in Chumash, that the day Moshe Rabbeinu was born, Vatera Eisei Ki Tev. The Moshe Rabbeinu was born, and Yocheved sees that he's good. So one of the definitions of Yetera Isek Yitev is Nesmala Abayas Kula Oida. The home became filled with light. A newborn baby brings light into the world. We don't know what this baby is going to be. There's a raya that there are certain babies, at the moment they're born, they're already Nesmala Abayas Kula Oida, because they were never destined to be prat. They're not individuals with a personal mission, in which case you have practical choices. A Rebbe, Neshama Klalis, has a whole different, of course he has choices, but on a very different level and in a very different dimension. And this is what Haman doesn't understand. In other words, Zayin Noda, by the virtue of the fact that it's being the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu, is the Mazel Toiv for Kol Klal Yisrael, Lot Seif Kol Adar. And Haman doesn't understand this. In other words, Haman doesn't understand the idea that there's an aspect of the relationship between Yidden and the Eibishter which is higher than free will. This is what he miscalculates. And that's why he thinks that this is a good month to affect something negative in Klal Yisrael. And like the Torah says in the Tanakh and the Megillah, V'napechu, every one of Haman's plans worked exactly as he intended it to work, against himself. Exactly what Haman envisioned. The whole approach, the whole strategy of Haman HaRasha worked out exactly as he planned it, but it worked out exactly for the opposite end, because he was missing a couple of little details, a couple of little facts. In any case, it's a bissel varet, maybe a bissel varet. Today is Zayin Oder. It's a unique day, and as I started to tell you at the beginning, we say Tachlan Zayin Oder. And in the Sefer HaManhagim it's written that the Rabbeim did not say Tachlan Zayin Oder. The Rabbeim considered Zayin Oder a special day. And by them it was a Moyed, it was a Yom Tov. They didn't say Tachlan. I don't know what else the Rabbeim did in Zayin Oder. Or if I can say it in other words, if I would see the Rabbeim do what they did in Zayin Oder, I probably wouldn't see anything. It's a Pnimi. Because there's a special connection between every Rebbe and every Rebbe, between Moshe Rabbeinu and the Rabbi Yisrael. So in other words, but the Lashon was only once they became Rebbe. That means B'chaya from Friedrich and Rebbe, the Rebbe said Tachlan Zayin Oder. During the lifetime of the Rebbe Rashab, the Friedrich Rebbe, it was only when they become a Rebbe that they have this special connection with Zayin Oder. The Rabbi Yossi had letters that he wrote to his father in the early years of the Rebbe's Nesius. And he used to keep himself a copy. And unbeknownst to him, those copies were borrowed for an indefinite period of time. And the Holubavitch has those letters. The only person that doesn't know that the Holubavitch has Rabbi Elkan's letters is Rabbi Elkan. Don't worry, his wife is part of the Geneva, but that's another story. In one of these letters, he writes the following. There's a Pachas HaChodesh, which is after Purim. There's a Haftarah. And we have a certain minhag what we say Pashas HaChodesh. And we say a shorter Pashas HaChodesh than other communities do. There's few psukim that is not in our tradition to say, but in other Kehilas Kadishas they do say it, I think, that the Rabbeim said, that the Rebbe said, because these few psukim speak about the Yin from Nasi. Now when the Rebbe became Rebbe, the Rebbe's humility was really frustrating to Chassidim. You know, the Rebbe was constantly belittling himself, you know, like a small person on a big chair, as he would describe it, if you will. So every sign, every indicator that the Rebbe was in fact accepting the role of Rebbe was very significant to Chassidim. And one of those details was when it came Pashas HaChodesh, Tavshin Yeral, everyone wanted to hear if the Rebbe would say those additional psukim. Or he wouldn't say those additional psukim. And he said them. so another reason for Chassidim to be happy. But I just want to show you, I'll finish with this. This is a bit of a controversy. Ladaiti. I'll share it to you anyway. Chai Yellow was a known holiday in Lubavitch. No one knew about Chai Yellow. There were people whom the Friedrich Rebbe had told privately about Chai Yellow. Reb Dov Meir Rabinovich met the Friedrich Rebbe in Tzadik Zayin or Tzadik Chas. He told him about Chai Yellow. The Friedrich Rebbe did not reveal the Yom Tov of Chai Yellow till Tavshin Gimel, 1943 in America. And he said, 50 years ago today, the Friedrich Rebbe had just been bar mitzvah, my father called me. And he told me to lock the door. And he told me, Good Yom Tov uns. Good Yom Tov to us. Heint is the Yom Ledes from the Shnei Ameres Agedel. Today is the birthday of the two great luminaries. And Chai Yelul was all of a sudden, it was a brand new Yom Tov from Lubavitch. And of course, Chassidim became a big deal. Chai Yelul. The Rebbe became a Rebbe. The first year or two, he fabrengt Chai Yelul. In fact, I think one year they actually made a Suda Chai Yelul. But then it seemed to stop. And the Rebbe didn't, Chai Yelul was the date for weddings. Once they get married, Chai Yelul. The night before was a wedding, the night after was a wedding. Chai Yelul, the Rebbe didn't fabrengt Chai Yelul until much, much, much later. And I saw in a Sikha where the Rebbe said, at the end of a Fabrengen of Chayelu, these words, the Rebbe de Shveret Amol gesagt, Chayelu, gut yomtov uns. The Friedrich Rebbe said once, and Chayelu gut yomtov to us. Now this whole expression is very unsettling. What do you mean, the Rebbe Amol gesagt? He once said, the connotation of once is exactly that, once. And what did he say? Gut yomtov uns, gut yomtov to us. Since when did the Rabbeim say gut yomtov uns? Now, I don't know what the Rebbe meant, and I don't know what the Friedrich Rebbe meant, but what I think he meant, and this is just an opinion, is that the Rebbe was saying Chayel's a Yom Tov for uns. It's a Yom Tov especially for the Rabbeim. And that's why he said, Amol gesagt in Asiche, good Yom Tov uns. In other words, although we all celebrate Chayel, but the Yom Tov of Chayel like the Yom Tov of Zayin Adar. It's a special day connected to the Rabbeim and the Nesiim, because Dafka Rebbe Nasi has a special connection to the Baal Shem Tov, to the Alter Rebbe, to Moshe Rabbeinu, and so forth and so on. And of course, the purpose of all of this is to understand the idea that the Rebbe brings from the Gemara, Basar Reisha Gufa Azul, that the body is supposed to follow the head. And when you're connected to the head, everybody benefits. And like the Rebbe teaches us in his letters and in the Sikhs, this means taka, listening to the Rebbe and doing what the Rebbe expects of us, but it also means asking the Rebbe to help us, going to the Oyhel, and davening for Yanim Gashmi and Yanim Ruchnim. There's letters from the Rebbe, when he gets some Friedrich and Rebbe, where he's pashat encouraging people to write to the Rebbe. Even though you would think that he's burdening his father-in-law, the Rebbe used to say, of a Rebbe hat nish kein Rachmanis. The Rebbe used to say, of a Rebbe hat nish kein Rachmanis. And a Rebbe you show no mercy. When the Friedrich Rebbe passed away, the Rebbe said, if we had showed the Rebbe Rachmanis, he would still be here. No, eat your heart out. You know that? The Rebbe said this. The Rebbe used to say, B'chai from Friedrich and Rebbe, on a Rebbe you don't have any Rachmanis. Then after Yud Shvati said, if we would have had Rachmanis, ich verstehe nicht. Ich verstehe Taka nicht. But push it better, Rebbe Yonim Gashmi, go to the oil, and to daven for all the Yom that we need, and the Rebbe will help, that when we'll see our miracles, it will enhance our faith. Enhance our faith, which will affect our ruchniistic lives, which is the point of it all. Last night I had a very interesting Fabrengen. I'm not going to tell you the details, but the essence of it was, I had a Fabrengen with a very interesting crowd. You told the story. Mamish, I was so impressed with this person. I don't know how frum he is. He has to be frum, but he comes home from work one day, and his wife tells him that their son stopped talking. Finished. Redt nicht. So, understandably, they went to doctors, and the doctors examined this child, and they told him that this is irreversible, that this child has an issue. They're going to work with him, but over time, as time passed, he told me 9 months passed. And of course, unfortunately, you get used to a tragedy. And it became sort of accepted that they cannot help this child. So the Lubavitcher Shliach says to him, I got to take you to the Ohel. He says, no, I don't need no Ohel. And this is his reason. He says, I always pray to God myself, and God always answers me. You imagine a Yid who's not frum. I mean, you tell me that's frummer than frum. He says, I've had many issues in my life. I always daven to the Eibishter, and the Eibishter helps me. After 9 months, they come home from one final appointment with one final doctor who said, this is it. And his wife says, what are we going to do? He says, he tells his wife, I'll take care of it. Apparently, I need a Rebbe. My own prayers are not enough. He went to the Ohel with the Shliach, and that same day his kids started talking again. And then he finishes the story. I don't think there was a Shem Shabbos in the room. He finishes the story by saying, since then, I think he said 20 or 30 miracles. So I said to him, I was so moved. I said to him, you understand that these miracles are all about your faith. He says, I know. Now the vet, what Rebbe gemacht an Nes. You forgive me for saying this, Lubavitcher Chassidim. The Rebbe gemacht an Nes. Gemacht an Nes. When a Yid knows, he's not frum, but he knows you have an issue, you talk to the Eibishter, and the Eibishter answers you. And then one time you talk to the Eibishter, and the Eibishter doesn't answer you. So you need the Rebbe's intervention. What's pshat? Push the moon and the Eibishter. When you have a moon in the Eibishter, so I said to him, who am I to tell such a person? I said, the miracle is not that your son started speaking, it's your faith. And he said, you're right. So simple. So, okay.